If you study the Second World War long enough, you eventually reach an uncomfortable realization. Survival often mattered more than morality. Nations were fighting industrial wars of annihilation, supply lines collapsed overnight, civilians were dragged into battle zones, and soldiers were abandoned behind enemy lines with nothing but their wits. What emerged from that chaos were survival methods so ruthless, so effective, and so ethically disturbing that many were later outlawed, buried in classified manuals, or quietly erased from official doctrine. On Iron Age instincts, we don't romanticize these methods. We examine them because they reveal how humans adapt under absolute pressure. If you want to understand real survival, not sanitized textbook versions, you have to confront what actually worked when everything else failed. Why wartime survival forced people to abandon modern morality entirely. By 1941, most armies realized that traditional rules of engagement were useless behind enemy lines. Soldiers trapped in occupied territory had to feed themselves, evade patrols, and move without leaving traces. Civilians under occupation faced starvation and reprisals if they were caught helping resistance fighters. Survival manuals written during the war were brutally honest, because, lies got people killed. After the war, many of these techniques were deemed incompatible with peacetime ethics, international law, or modern military conduct, and were formally banned or, quietly suppressed. How starvation warfare led to deliberate contamination tactics. One of the darkest survival tricks involved deliberate food contamination. Resistance units and isolated soldiers learned to render food unusable to pursuing enemy forces by tainting supplies with substances that caused severe illness but were unlikely to kill outright. The logic was, simple. A sick unit could not pursue you. These methods were later banned because, they blurred the line between survival and biological warfare. The practical lesson today is not poisoning, but rather understanding denial tactics. In modern survival situations, destroying or hiding resources to prevent hostile use can be just as important as securing your own. Knowing how quickly food spoils, how contamination spreads, and how supply chains fail remains, honestly, a critical survival skill. How silent killing methods were perfected and eventually outlawed. World War II saw the refinement of silent killing techniques using improvised tools, cords, wire, and blunt objects. These were taught explicitly to commandos and resistance fighters operating in urban environments. After the war, many of these methods were classified or removed from manuals because of their brutality and, their potential for misuse. From a survivalist perspective, the takeaway is not violence, but stealth discipline. The emphasis was on approaching undetected, controlling noise and ending confrontations instantly to avoid alerts. Today, this translates into learning movement discipline, sound control, and, whenever possible, avoidance rather than confrontation. Why survival manuals taught soldiers to fake disease and injury? Feigning illness was a documented survival tactic used by prisoners of war and civilians under forced labor. soldiers were trained to simulate symptoms convincingly enough to be removed from work details or transport lists. This was later discouraged and banned because it undermined medical systems and violated wartime conduct codes. The modern application lies in understanding human behavior under authority. Knowing how systems triage, how guards think, and how bureaucracies operate can be the difference between escape and death. Survival often depends on psychological intelligence, not physical strength. How scorched earth microtactics were used at the individual level. Scorched earth is usually discussed at a national level, but World War II survival manuals encouraged individuals to apply it locally. Refugees and retreating fighters destroyed bridges, tools, livestock, and even clothing caches to prevent enemy reuse. These actions were devastating to local populations and later condemned. The survival lesson here is harsh, but real. Denying an aggressor resources can stop pursuit or occupation. In modern disasters, this translates into understanding when to abandon, conceal, or destroy equipment to prevent theft or misuse, especially in lawless environments. Why extreme rationing methods crossed ethical lines. WWII survival rations often included practices that would later be banned, such as forced caloric deprivation schedules and consumption of otherwise taboo protein sources. Soldiers were trained to survive on shockingly low intake for extended periods, sometimes at severe long-term health cost. These methods were later prohibited due to lasting damage to the body. For modern survivalists, the lesson is metabolic discipline. Learning controlled fasting, ration stretching, and energy conservation can save lives without pushing the body into irreversible harm. How interrogation resistance crossed into psychological torture. Resistance fighters were trained to withstand interrogation using techniques that included self-inflicted pain, dissociation, and memory fragmentation. These methods helped protect networks but caused lifelong trauma. After the war, such techniques were condemned and banned. The applicable knowledge today is understanding stress inoculation. Controlled exposure to discomfort, sleep deprivation awareness, and mental resilience training can prepare individuals for crisis without crossing into self-destruction. What these banned survival tricks teach us about human limits is, well, truly remarkable. What makes these World War II survival methods disturbing is not just their brutality, but their effectiveness. They worked because they exploited biology, psychology, and systems under extreme stress. Modern society prefers cleaner narratives, but honestly, survival does not care about comfort or reputation. The key is extracting principles without repeating the cruelty. Stealth over strength, denial over confrontation, psychology over force, and preparation over heroics are lessons that remain timeless. If you're here on Iron Age Instincts, it's because you want the truth about how people really survived when civilization collapsed around them. These stories aren't about glorifying brutality. They are about understanding human adaptability at its rawest. If this kind of deep, unfiltered history matters to you, subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who still thinks survival is a hobby, and keep studying the past. Because, you know, History doesn't repeat itself, but human instincts always do.